Welcome to the presentation on male coalitional violence. Today we are learning about how individuals and small groups cooperate in order to compete with one another, and why it's more likely that these groups are made up of males. So it might seem like a bit of an oxymoron that in order to compete in groups, one has to be able to cooperate with other individuals. But this is absolutely necessary. In order to create a group, you have to team up with others, and by doing so, this can increase your individual competitiveness because now you have a team you're working with. Many primates in polygynous and polyandrous mating systems have coalitional violence because only by acting together as a group can they successfully compete with other individuals who are also often cooperating in groups. So we see this chimpanzee patrol here. These chimpanzees are all males, and they're out patrolling the boundary of their territory to make sure that no other males can sneak through and mate with their females. And by maintaining this territory, they ensure their own access to females, and they can more effectively, by working together, keep other males out of the territory. We can also see a picture here of two baboons. These are both, well, three, but the two larger ones are males, and they're chasing off a stranger male. By working together, these two males can maintain control over access to a harem of females, and they can successfully rout rival males who may have been able to overcome either one of them, but by working together, they gain the benefit of successfully defending a particular group of females. In the primate world, coalitions are often small and usually involve close kin. So this chimpanzee patrol group is often as large as you will see male coalitions, with a few exceptions. And I recommend reviewing the presentation on cooperation if you're still wondering why these groups often involve close kin. So next question is, well, why primates and why humans? We've previously discussed how animals often compete, but primates are more likely to compete in coalitions than a lot of other mammals, and that's because they're primarily group-living social animals, and primates have a social psychology that allows them to interpret and predict the behaviors of others in the group, which makes cooperation cognitively easier. Humans, as being hypersocial, have a hypersocial psychology. We are the most cooperative primate of all, and for this reason we see a lot more male coalitional violence and coalitional violence in general because we are so good at cooperating. And remember, in order to compete as a group, you have to cooperate with other individuals to create a group. So why males? Don't females compete? Well, of course they do, and of course they compete in coalitions, but male violence is often more extreme and more often occurring in coalitions. And that's because for mammals, like and primates, including primates, there's often greater variance in male reproductive success, as we learned from the example of the elephant seals. And when the variance in reproductive success is larger, we know that selection pressure on competition is stronger. So those individuals who can increase their competitiveness by engaging in coalitional violence might get a leg up. So we predict that we would see coalitional violence more often in species that live in social groups and where the variance in male reproductive success is high. So when reproductive variance is high, increasing your competitiveness by teaming up with someone else may be the only pathway to reproductive success. As in some baboon troops, you have to cooperate with another male in order to maintain control over the group. Also, a majority of human residence patterns, so talking about humans, are patrilocal, and as we said, it's easier to cooperate with kin. Patrilocal means that when a couple is married, they go to live with or near the husband's kin. This means that husbands are living in the same area as their fathers and their sons and their other male relatives, and because they're around male relatives and it's easier to cooperate with your relatives, then we expect to see more male coalitions. And don't forget that cooperation is hard. It's quite easy to make mistakes. If you've ever slept through your promise to drive someone to the airport or forgotten to buy someone a beer who bought one for you, you know that it's easy to make mistakes when people do things for you and you forget or neglect to respond, and vice versa. Remember, cooperation only works if you recoup your loss. If you don't, that's considered altruism, when we rarely see altruism. And cooperation is hard because others can take advantage of you. And this kind of goes back to the previous point. But humans are pretty good at cooperation, including coalitional violence. And just to have it in print, coalitional violence is violence that occurs between small groups, anywhere from a handful to 100 or more, not in the size that we would see in major world wars, for example. So not thousands versus thousands. In a coalitional group, you are expected to be familiar with other members at least. So you must cooperate with other individuals in order to compete as a group. And you might take this for granted, but groups must exist, and success must bring benefits to individual participants. So male elephant seals, for example, do not form groups, so we don't see coalitional violence. Primates are good at forming groups. Groups exist among most primates and among humans, and when these groups compete with other groups and success can bring benefits to individual participants, then we expect to see coalitional violence. So Yanomamo warfare is an example of coalitional violence, and in this society about 30% of deaths, of male deaths, are from interpersonal violence. Now some people might think this figure is overrated, but it's still quite a high number. Now we know that groups exist among the Yanomamo, and that individuals are primarily patrilocal, residing with family, new couples residing with the husband's kin. And we know that competitiveness of groups brings success to individual members. So unokais, those individuals who have killed another person, are more likely to have a larger number of wives than non-unokais, as you have read this week, and you can see in Table 3 here. Now the Yanomamo are a good example because male coalitional violence is more likely when contested resources are either necessary and or movable. And Chagnon's hypothesis that males are fighting over women demonstrates both of these points. In order for males to reproduce, they need women. And in this case, women are movable as the men go on raids and bring captured women back to their village. Coalitional violence is also common among pastoralists with movable property such as cows and horses. And we expect to see coalitional violence increase when resources are limited or valuable. So in drought years, we expect to see violence increase as the number of animals becomes limited. And the more valuable the resources are, the more individuals have to gain by competing for them. So we see a great deal of castle construction in feudal Europe as populations are filling up the landscape and arable land becomes a scarce, valuable resource. Individuals who control the land are more likely to build up coalitions so that they can compete with others, at least in terms of defense, in order to maintain control of their resource or to attempt to steal the resources of others. Now, arable land is not necessarily movable, but during this time it's definitely limited and it's definitely valuable. An interesting aspect to this reasoning is that while humans may be primed for cooperation within coalitions, we might find some behavioral predisposition because our ancestors who were successfully competed within groups. But this predisposition might not go so far as directing us towards specific circumstances. We may just feel the urge to compete within a group, but it might not be specific to a certain environment. And so there may be some disconnect with natural selection occurring when we see sports teams, for example, or fights among fans of sports teams who are competing as coalitions, but there may not be any resources at stake or benefits to be gained. Now, you might argue that successful football players are more likely to have more money and have more wives, but that's a hypothesis we would have to test. So we may see coalitional violence in circumstances that do not affect survival and reproductive success. And finally, don't forget that culture matters. With whom we compete, how you create a coalition, males, females, kin, non-kin, clan members, neighbors, what they're competing over, animals, land, wives, points in a football match, with what they're competing, the types of weapons, how competitions work, and how many individuals compete. All of these things vary in time and space. And while we see male coalitional violence in many societies around the world, the how, why, and where varies greatly. And we can only say that humans, compared to other mammals, even other primates, are really good at forming coalitions for cooperation. That's it for today. Please join me next time, and we will be discussing limits and pitfalls to cooperation. Thanks for listening.